listening to Practice on Purpose, where physicians can explore how to set up their career on purpose from the very beginning to stay connected to their purpose for their entire career. I'm Dr. Nicole Ewell, a health psychologist with decades of experience in healthcare, from the front lines of a level 1 trauma center to the leadership in one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. I'm passionate about physician well-being and creating mentally healthy workplaces. If you want to thoughtfully establish a career that aligns with your values and passions and ensure a long and rewarding life as a physician, then you've come to the right place. Today, we're talking about the us versus them mentality that many medical professionals and medical administrators feel towards each other and how to change that narrative. Our guest is Stu Schaff, a physician compensation expert helping to make great medical groups even better through his work as the founder and principal of Intentionate Healthcare Advisors. Welcome, Stu.
Hi.
So, Stu, why don't you give us a little intro to yourself and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, I thought you did a really nice job of introducing me, but sure. Beyond my name and my title, I live here in outside the Chicago area, and I've been working in healthcare pretty much my entire career, and I love it.
Great. I'm also a former Chicago resident, so I love talking to people from the old neighborhood. So I want to ask you a few questions about this. We've kind of talked before, and we wanted to talk a little bit about this mentality. And I know that this us versus them mindset is something I'm seeing a lot of in work and training. And I'm seeing a lot of physicians feeling like administrators don't care about them in their healthcare practice, and having administrators feel like, the physicians don't understand their complexities or the financial and logistical barriers that they're facing. So I think we both feel that there's some solutions and ways to get through this and to create a better narrative and a better conversation for people.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about first, how did you come to do the work that you do?
So yeah, healthcare, I mentioned I've been in healthcare my whole career on the business side. The roots of that, I think, go way back. My mom actually died from a rare condition, and my dad ended up remarrying into a family with 2 nurses and 2 pharmacists. You can only imagine the kinds of dinner table conversations that we had. My sister actually ended up becoming a nurse. My brother ended up becoming a doctor. I ended up on the business side of healthcare. We won't talk about the 4th sibling. But I just had this kind of this sense that we have folks out here doing really important work, and I've always really respected that. And I ended up, as you mentioned, really focusing on on physician compensation. And I really have worked closely with physicians, with administrators for over 15 years, and have spent that time reviewing hundreds and hundreds of employment contracts and professional services agreements for employers. I've talked with thousands of physicians about their situations and the challenges that they face. And I even worked at a large medical group here in the Chicago area. So I've ended up kind of seeing really all these different perspectives, and have had an interesting view of that problem that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And so where do you think this comes from? What is your understanding of this us versus them mentality? How did it get to be so common?
Yeah. So, as I've been reflecting over the last few years and seeing all these headlines about physicians and other healthcare professionals being unhappy and leaving medicine, which really scares me, right? On a personal level. The more that I've reflected on it and my experience, the more that I became convinced that path to burnout started really all the way in the beginning, when a physician is recruited for their first job without clear expectations of what life like a physician will be like. But why does that happen, right? And this kind of brings us to that us versus them thing. It's the system, right? And I mean system in kind of the broad sense, the way healthcare works in this country. This is sort of my thought here and what I've seen with my family, with my friends, with clients that I've worked with. So we as a society, this is my theory, right? We as a society look up to doctors just like I did, right? Just like I do. And in a sense where we almost put them on a pedestal. You went to medical school. You've been trained to be a doctor. You've been trained to heal. You've been trained to do these incredible things. And who am I, as someone who's not a physician, to tell you how to do your job?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I, as someone who's not a physician, an administrator, or whatever it may be, don't tell you how to do your job, right? I don't say, here's what you need to do. Here's how you practice, right? Not from a clinical perspective, but in terms of like day-to-day doing the job,
Mm-hmm.
which is really unlike any other job, even within healthcare, right? I'll bet that you, when you were working clinically, had a pretty clear job description. The folks who you were working with, whether they were other clinical folks or administrators, probably had very clear job descriptions. When I was working in a medical group, mine was 4 pages long, right?
Yeah.
So, but we don't do that for physicians, right? And this is not a one-sided thing though, right? Physicians are not trained to think about their lives as a physician. They're trained only on the clinical side of things, right? And that is starting to change a little bit, but that's really how it's been for so long. And so they're not asking the questions that they need to be asking to fill that gap. And so we end up in a situation where nobody is really talking to each other in a common way. And it creates this sort of tribal situation, right? Which is not great. But fortunately, there are ways that groups can and do make things better.
And so we're definitely hoping to hear some of your stories and success stories. I think, you're talking about this, the word a lot of people use is silos, right? With these silos of your specialty and your what work you do. And I think it's actually really common in healthcare to maybe have a supervisor or a boss who doesn't actually understand what you do or isn't the expert. So you might be a physician, but your technical boss might be an administrator who has an MBA or a management degree. And so what I'm hearing you saying is that maybe there's not this shared language about what are the expectations of you as a worker, as an employee. What is your job description, and who do you answer to, and what authority does that person have to say what you can and can't do? And also just feeling like expectations are clear so you can do a good job and feel like you're doing a good job. I know a lot of physicians who aren't even really sure who their boss is or who should be giving their semi-annual reviews. And when was the last time you got one? Oh, I don't know. I really don't even know who's supposed to give that. So you don't even get a check-in of how you're doing along the way. And so I think it can be difficult. And then I also think that administrators they answer to people too. They answer to a board, they answer to their supervisors, they answer to budget. They have to make sure that all the other people supporting the physicians also have a paycheck at the end of every 2 weeks, so I think there is that need to bridge the gap a little bit. So I think that being said, you're talking about expectations and what you think your job should look like versus what maybe your supervisor thinks your job should look like. So what are some things that what do physicians need to really connect with in themselves before they look for a job, or while they're looking for a job? And what are those, why are these expectations important? Are there like deal breakers or things that they absolutely have to have? What do they need to know and think about?
You just hit on something really interesting. So, I talked a moment ago about maybe why things are the way that they are, just the reality of what you face when you go into the working world as a physician, when you go into practice, following residency, which is not real life, right, in some degree.
Right.
And I think what too many people do, and I've seen this as I've worked with individual physicians, but also from the other side, is that there's this kind of because you don't get great advice or training in terms of the things that we're trying to think of, there's this tendency to focus on the things that seem straightforward, and you end up seeing a huge focus on like salary in a contract. You see a huge thing on focus on signing bonus or student loan reimbursement, like these sort of buzzwords that are out there, like, hey, this is what you need to fight for if you are thinking about anything at all, right? I'll tell you that I've got plenty of stories of people who were so worried that they might like offend a potential employer that they didn't question anything within their contracts, right? They were like, and they know what I do for a living, right? These are people who are close to me. They wouldn't even give me a day to look at their contract because they were so terrified that it was going to, alienate the employer or something. And anyway,
You're not the first person to come on this show to say that they were a little offended that people close to them didn't give them a chance to help them. So
right, exactly. All we want to do is help. But, so that's what they kind of end up focusing on in the absence of knowing any better, right? And so people will come to me and they'll, whether it's an employer saying, what's the right compensation model, or really to the point here, a physician saying, how much should I be asking for? What should I be getting paid? And I answer the question with a question, which some people find annoying, but I think it's important, which is, what are you trying to accomplish? Why? What is important to you, right? And there's so many different ways to look at this. So like, I'm going to put aside pay for a second here and talk about things that are even more fundamentally important. Think about what your day-to-day life looks like, right? And again, this is even before you get to expectations. Okay, so you're coming out of a residency, a fellowship. Do you want to be doing just clinical work, or do you also want to be doing teaching? Do you want to be doing research? Do you want to work solo? Do you want to have clinical colleagues, right, in your practice, whether that's other physicians or advanced practice providers? Do you want to be a partner or an owner in a practice, or would you rather be an employee? Do you want to work in an urban setting, a rural setting, suburban setting? Do you want to be in a group that's a single specialty, or do you want to have the resources of multi-specialty, even though that might be more complicated? Do you want to be in a practice that's more of what I would call a lifestyle practice, where you can fit it kind of around the way you want to live your life and work when you want to live? Or do you have the kind of drive to be more, I guess, entrepreneurial or, hustle kind of thing? These are all really critically important. And I would even say practically, then, when you have an idea of those kinds of things, think about, again, practically, what do you want your like days to look like, your calendars, right? Like me personally, it's really important that I have certain time carved out for my family, right? And I've been fortunate to allow my business to work around that. And a lot of physicians that I've worked with, they don't ask those questions up front. They don't think about those things up front. They get into a job, and then suddenly they have to kind of fight to carve out that time, as opposed to building it in front end, right? And that goes for call, that goes for, different types of coverage, where you might have to work, all those different kinds of things. And the bottom line here is, like, we don't think enough about what that word means to us.
right.
So that's what it all boils down to. if you were to say, this is the life that I want to live, you want to sit down and really be honest with yourself, brutally honest about what does that look like, right?
Right. And I think this is fundamental to what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast is practice on purpose. So choosing on purpose your way of staying connected to your purpose. So if you love to work and you want to work all the time and you have a partner that's willing to support that and you're diving into innovative research and that's going to bring you joy and your partner's okay with that, well, then that's great. If you're someone who values family and needs to be home when the school bus lets out, then that's going to be different questions and different negotiations. But what we really want to accomplish here is to help people really think about that. So I think you're right on with what you're saying is really consider what kind of life you want first, and then look for the job that meets that need. I think there's a lot of early professionals who take the job that looks good on paper, or was the natural next step, or was a mentor that they valued and respected said, hey, I've got this connection. We can get you in here.
Yeah. Now let me ask you, put you on the hot seat a little bit.
Sure.
So if you were to think about those kinds of things today in your clinical career, what would be the kinds of things that are important to you today?
Yeah. So today they would be flexibility. I love to travel. I love to be able to say yes to a walk with a friend in the middle of the day. And I have the luxury running my own business now of doing that. I would say 10 years ago, and even I have a 15-year-old, 15 years ago, my priority was being home some of the time. I did not want to be working 40 hours at the time. So I was working in hospital settings, in a large healthcare organization, and I had fantastic supervisors and looked for jobs where they were supportive of me working part-time. And to that end, I actually had a supervisor who wanted me to create a position for myself at the director level. And I wanted to still work part-time, maybe 30 hours. And he advocated for me, and HR said, we don't do directors part-time. And he said, you do now. And he got them to approve it. And so that to me was priceless. That bought my loyalty, my hard work, and my passion, because that was someone who was willing to work with me and give me the things I needed, which made me even more engaged when I was there. And I felt respected and heard, and I felt appreciated and valued and seen as a person. So I do think these questions are so important. And there are people out there and there are groups out there that will do this.
Absolutely. So that was really great how you went back and showed that those things, your priorities really changed over time, and that would reflect what you want, which of course comes with the lessons that you learn. I don't want to say maturity, right? But it's the mistakes that you make, the lessons that you learn from those mistakes. Mm-hmm. So I want to now I want to have you go back even further. When you got your first job, what do you think was the most important thing to you then? What do you remember as the most important thing to you then?
Right. Well, my very first job was working for my father at a sign shop and his business. So we're not going to talk too much about that. Yeah. But we didn't have a lot of negotiation going on there. I just showed up and did the work. But I'd say my first job in my career, there were things that I was looking for, such as respect for the fact that I was bilingual. So I was actually looking to work in a different city, and my fiance at the time, but now husband, had decided to switch all of a sudden to another city. His work was sending him there, and we were suddenly looking at a city that valued my ability to speak Spanish. And we were able to negotiate higher pay because I spoke Spanish. So at the time, I was young, I had loans to pay. My priority was making as much money as I possibly could with my degree, right? So that was what was a priority then. And one of the ways that I was more marketable was that And the way I could stand out was my Spanish. So I was looking for a place that saw that as valuable and was willing to compensate me for that. So,
Right.
maybe listeners here don't know, but when you have a master's degree in psychology, you're not going to come out of the gate making a massive amount of money. So every few $1,000s really helped. Now that I have a doctor's, different conversation, but yeah. So I think what I will say is that I have never been afraid to ask for those things or to say what I needed and not be ashamed or embarrassed of those things. And it's the places that we're cool with that and we're excited about those contributions or those priorities that are the best places to work, right? They're the places that you want to be.
Right. And you're a good person to ask this because you are trained to think about thinking, right? So, at the end of the day, I think what I'm suggesting here, number one, is not that money isn't important, because it is important, right? But number two, that you really need to be honest with yourself, to give yourself a compass that helps you make decisions.
Right. So what are the things that you think people need to understand before they start a job or join a practice or a healthcare organization?
So I do some speaking to residents and fellows as well, go out to residency programs. And as part of that presentation, one of the things that I tell them is there are 4 questions that you need to answer when you're thinking about joining a practice, whatever it may be. So you've narrowed them down using the criteria, that the kinds of things that we were talking about a moment ago here, and you're really making a decision here. You've got an employment agreement, all that, and the first question is: are you as sure as you can be that you want to work for this practice, given what you know about it, the culture? Right. Hopefully, you've looked into the culture, who the colleagues are. Hopefully, you've met a bunch of the team, if not all the team, the reputation of the organization, where they are geographically, all those kinds of things. Because the bottom line is you can't change those things, right? So, if you're, if you think like, I like everything but X, and then but X is really a thorn in your side, it's really important to be honest with yourself about that.
Right. Not the best match.
Yeah, exactly. The second thing is, are you absolutely clear about what will be expected of you in the job? Right? That goes back to those expectations. And this is not something necessarily that physicians, again, are trained to ask. It's not something that administration is necessarily in the mindset to provide, right? So I'm putting a little bit of burden on the shoulders of the physicians, saying like, look, this is your life. You don't assume that someone is going to just hand this to you. You need to ask for these things. The way that I think about it is, so what they expect you to do, what do they expect you to do, when, where, and with whom, right? You should be able to think about it like, again, like the helpful way that I think about it is like a calendar, right? How often am I going to be on call? Is that going to be home call? Am I going to have to be in the hospital? What days, if I'm in the OR, what days am I in the OR versus in clinic versus in an inpatient setting? Am I teaching? Am I supervising, advanced practice providers? There's so many different aspects of it, and you just want to be absolutely clear. So if you, are told you're going to be doing X, and it begs a question of like, well, what does that look like? Ask that question. What does it look like? Right.
I would add here that you want to ask also about like committee responsibilities. What committees, what are the recurring meetings? How often does the team meet together? How often do I meet with my supervisor? Who is my supervisor? Because I think committees start to get to be a real, they can be very enhancing of a career, and they can also be very draining.
Absolutely. And it's not that you're saying like, I'm inflexible or anything like that, or like I'm looking to hold you to a particular thing. This is written in stone. This is about understanding what your life is going to look like when you're practicing, right? And every practice setting is going to be different. And if you want to actually be able to compare different practice settings, you have to get the full picture, right? Because we have this tendency to kind of look at the headlines and say, based on a headline, this is this, that is that. But when you dig deeper, you might get a completely different picture. So that's also really important. The third question is, are you absolutely clear on what you'll earn and how you can earn more? So notice, again, I'm a compensation guy, right? And I said compensation third. It's important, but it's not the most important. Once you understand what's expected of you, then you can understand what's fair pay for that, right?
Right.
And I mentioned earlier that people tend to be most focused in their first contract on their base compensation and signing bonuses, because it's kind of an easy thing to get your mind on. But like, there are so many ways to split up the pie of compensation. I mean, I haven't seen this yet, but there's no reason why an employer couldn't do like funny hat bonus, right? They could say, we're going to pay you $10 a day for every time you wear a funny hat.
Sure, why not?
Nobody's taken me up on that idea yet, but there's no reason why they couldn't, right? So you want to make sure that when you have different kinds of incentives, whether it might be a volume-based incentive or revenue-based incentive, or working with a certain size population if you're in primary care, or there's just so many iterations of those. Those are just three examples. That you understand how it works. You understand the likelihood of achieving a bonus. You understand how you would potentially be supported in achieving those things. What kind of resources would your employer do, whether it's, MAs, nursing staff, different types of things? What are you going to be responsible for? Because just saying like, oh, this money might be available to me, doesn't really give you the full picture, right?
I would add here that there's different ways that compensation can be described, and how it looks in your portal, or I have some physicians I know are on salary. It's pretty straightforward, right? They work, they get a salary. Other physicians are on base plus productivity, and others are straight productivity, and so it gets very complicated. But I know that it really annoys physicians when whatever the compensation, however it's laid out, that it looks like they're paying for their vacation. So they get kind of deducted when they take vacation. And so I've worked with some physicians in the past where because they're getting a check, but then there's a deduction for the PTO, it makes it look like they owe the company money at certain times of the year. So it's always helpful to understand that and wrap your mind around it and make peace with it, so that you're not feeling resentful when you're looking at the way your compensation is described and expressed in writing. Just a thought that I know is a sore note for certain people.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's another example that I can give, which is around those signing bonuses, or another flavor of that is forgivable loans, which is just, they're different from a tax perspective. We don't need to get into the detail. Yeah. But one thing that, let's just say someone who I worked with, who worked for a large group that we're both very familiar with, had a situation where they ended up owing money back when they left their employment, right? And she didn't really fully understand that on the front end, didn't really fully consider the implications of that, right? And so again, just really getting in there and understanding it. Negotiation is a whole nother thing. But that understanding will really ultimately just give you a much better peace of mind.
Absolutely.
Right? And the fourth question is pretty straightforward. And that is, have you asked every question that you have, and have you received acceptable answers to those questions? Yeah. Just the process of asking questions and seeing how they're responded to, if they're responded to, right?
Yeah.
Tells you a lot.
Yeah. I think I would add that one of the questions you could ask is, what does success look like? Like, how, if I'm knocking it out of the park, what's that going to look like? And also understanding, as part of this, as compensation, really understanding what benefits mean. It's really hard, especially early in your career when you're in your 20s, 30s, retirement, delayed compensation, all that 401k, it just doesn't sound as sexy as it does when you're in your 40s. You're much closer to retirement. And suddenly I wish personally I had paid more attention and been more excited about my retirement benefits than I was in my 20s. I am really into it now. And my husband's like, who is this person who suddenly cares about this stuff? But I've got beach houses and retirement plans in my head now. And I wasn't asking those questions, or really, I admit, I'll be the first to admit, I was the one going, yeah, benefits, 401k, whatever. I'm sure that's all the same, but it's not. It's not all the same. There's a lot of cool benefits that people can offer that can help you save a massive amount of money. So,
yeah. And I think a big part of that comes with surrounding yourself with people who are going to give you good advice for you. Right.
And we've had some good people come on already about loan repayment, loan reimbursement, and how to ask those questions, and financial planning and salary negotiations. So I think this show is really doing it's our due diligence in trying to help people understand who they can talk to answer those questions. So we've talked a little bit about this idea of getting ready for a job. I think one things that occurred to me a few minutes ago was that many administrators or physician leaders feel frustration. And I think they're all saying it's a generational thing, but I've been in this field for 20 years. So they were saying it about the last generation as well. But they think these kids these days, a lot of medical professionals, because if they were able to, their parents really wanted to give them the best opportunity to succeed academically. Many medical professionals haven't had a real job. Maybe they worked at the babysitting, or maybe they worked part-time at the grocery store, or things like that in high school and college. But once you get to medical school, it's very difficult to hold what you would tentatively call a real job. And so there's a lot of things about a real job that are their learning curve, right? Like checking your emails proactively, understanding what your contract means. These are things. Are you seeing that at all with administrators, that they're, or with physicians, that maybe there's some learning curve on understanding how being employed full-time as an adult works?
I think that's a trouble. That's a challenge rather for everybody, right? But you are absolutely right that a lot of the people that we are speaking to, and not to pick on him, but my brother, who's a doctor, was in the same boat, right? Was in that situation before he started working as well, right? So yes, I think that's something that we all struggle with, and frankly, it's something where you learn on the job. But I find the best salve for that is communicating.
Right. Ask questions.
Asking questions, just making sure that you are, you're being clear, that you're being clearly understood, right? That you are clearly understanding what someone is, saying of you, that you're asking, asking those questions. So yeah, I really think that gives you a little bit of an edge. Maybe a little bit of do people still say life hack? I don't know.
Sure they do. I think so. I think also just asking for and being receptive to feedback, being hungry for feedback, and seeing it. It's really hard when you're in a career where you've had to get straight A's and accomplish a bazillion things to get into medical school and then to get in residency programs. So failure doesn't feel like an option, or not knowing the answer to something doesn't feel like an option, or making a mistake doesn't feel like an option. So when I used to train medical residents, we'd always say, look, the resident who has gaps in their knowledge and knows it is not near as scary as the resident who has gaps in their knowledge and doesn't know it. So seeking feedback and being receptive to it, I think, is really, really helpful. So if you are an early career professional, a physician, you're about to negotiate an employment contract, how do you keep that us versus them trap at bay?
Well, yeah. So first of all, I mean, the first thing that I always say is, even if you heard or it was implied to you that you're not going to be able to negotiate, that come on, nobody else is going to speak up for you. I always tell people you need to ask for what you need or what you want, because nobody's just going to necessarily give it to you. And it's got to be aligned with those things that we talked about earlier. When it comes to salary, for example, the conventional wisdom, right, is that your salary at your first job sort of helps dictate what your career is going to look like. So if you ask early, that's, that could have an impact on things down the road. So the higher, the better. But like, it's even simpler than that. If you don't ask for something as a physician in life, you're 100% guaranteed not to get it. Right?
For sure.
So, four things, I like fours, I guess. So 4 things here too. So number 1, going back to what I was saying earlier about the compass, the must-haves, the deal breakers, that kind of thing, it's really important to have those things and to kind of rank them. It's really easy to come up with a list of changes in a contract. If you hire an attorney, to look at it, or someone like me to look at it for you, you can come up with a list of stuff, and that's great. But having those priorities, and priority implies, a priority order, is really good. What is the most, if you can't get everything, what's the most important thing to focus on, right? That's one thing that I would recommend, is really ranking kind of what is most important in terms of what you would be asking for to be changed in a negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, when you do ask for something, is working together, not being adversarial, but working together with with that employer to try and find a solution that meets your goals without, hurting them, a win-win, right? Mm-hmm. So how can we both benefit from what we're talking about? And you're often able to do those kinds of things, right? The third thing, and this is maybe a little counterintuitive when you're talking about trying to not be adversarial, but be willing to walk away, right?
Yeah.
And here's how I think about it. Bigger picture. There are more opportunities for physicians than there are physicians to fill those opportunities, right?
For sure.
That means that as a physician, you are in a really, really good, strong position, generally speaking, right? So I believe that will give you some confidence, which will then help you feel less like, and I'm going to say this because I have seen people act this way, feel less like a cornered animal that wants to kind of lash out and be a little bit more adversarial, right? So having that understanding, having that mentality kind of helps chill you out a little bit and put you in a better position to work together towards that solution. And because we're talking about a human being and a human being sitting across the table from each other, right? And so most importantly, just remember that you have to work with these people if you take this job, right? Mm-hmm. And so you always want to be reasonable and respectful in your, in whatever you're asking for. And another little tip that I give people that I have done in my own career and has worked really well is to say, like, use these words. All I'm trying to do here is make sure that I'm putting myself, and more importantly, my family, in the best position that I can.
Right.
Yeah. And the human being across the table understands that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it helps get kind of the sense. So just to summarize, having a really clear sense of priority about what you're asking for and how it relates to kind of what those goals you have and everything are, working together with the the employer to find something that works for both sides, having the mindset of an understanding, like, I'm going to be okay if this doesn't work out. I don't have to lash out. I don't have to be desperate in what I'm doing. And then saying, like, hey, we're going to work together on this. I'm just trying to do this from a perspective of like, I have to live this life afterwards.
Yeah. So once you do say yes and you you take this job, what are some communication strategies or ways to cultivate relationships that avoid that conflict and maybe foster a really thriving relationship between the physician and the admin?
Taking time to invest in relationships, right?
Hmm.
Sitting down, actually saying, hey, I recognize that I spend hours and hours and hours every day, every week, every month, every year with these people, working together towards the same goals of treating patients as best we can, right? And we may all have different roles, but we're all on this team together. How can we best complement each other, right? Uh, in working toward that goal, and that might be a question that you ask your other teammates, understanding what they're doing, understanding what they are, what kind of pressures that they're getting, right? So that you're sort of trying to learn their language a little bit,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And get in their mindset, putting a toe into their shoes, if you will. um, that is so critically important, and that's ultimately how we get to a point where we have better population health, better patient experience, lower cost of care. That's triple aim for any of you that have learned that. And
Sure.
then you get to the next iteration of that, all those things together with improving the lives of the clinicians and the care teams, right?
Hmm.
And that really comes in by focusing, I think, on those relationships. And you have to invest your time, your energy, your effort in that. What have you, as a person who focuses on physician wellness and and interpersonal dynamics and things like that, is there anything that you found to be particularly effective here?
Yes, the one that my one of my previous teams we always came back to was assume good intent, right? And always assume that the other person means well. And their intention or their goal may be slightly different than yours. Their priority might be the budget and yours is getting home on time, or their priority might be approving the new build out for the wing of whatever, and you're looking at why are they double booking us? So I think always keeping those communication lines open with the thought that this person also has good, valuable, worthwhile priorities that they're working on, and not just assuming you're the only source of truth on that. So for example, I know a VP of finance once who said, my job is to make sure that 75,000 employees have a paycheck every 2 weeks. I mean, that's a good goal, right? And so sometimes he had to say no to people. And I'm sure he wasn't like excited about saying no to people all the time. But his priority that he was thinking about is we have to make sure that this hospital or this large system can pay out 75,000 people and that 75,000 families are fed every 2 weeks. That's also good, right? So for me, assume good intent has been a real a real helpful one. Just remembering that there's a person on the other side of that conversation,
I love it.
who also has a family and may not have slept well last night or may have things going on in their life, right? So I want to ask you a few questions just about you and your purpose. I like to end by asking a few questions just around how you stay vibrant. And so, what is your greatest passion or purpose?
Professionally, it's helping to create the conditions where physicians love to practice, so that we can stem the tide of people not practicing anymore.
So when things get tough and you're feeling overwhelmed, or maybe conversations get a little dicey, how do you stay connected to your purpose?
I would say it would be creating opportunities to sit down and talk, like I was talking about, really investing that time and that effort. I will tell you that I have this image in my head of like, what is the ideal like vibe for me, right? And it's, sitting around a table, sitting around a fire, and just like having a conversation with someone, a deep conversation, an honest conversation, asking questions, learning about their life, learning about where they're from, where they're going, just kind of more interesting rather. So it's that.
And how does your work currently align with that purpose?
Okay. Well, two things. So one is that we help medical groups become the best practice in their communities, starting with the way that they set expectations and work with their physicians and pay them and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's where we talk about those things and trying to create those medical groups where physicians love to work. Also, we help individual physicians understand, evaluate, and negotiate their contracts. So those are both things that we're doing. We have the same kinds of conversations. It's just aimed at a different audience, but the reality is the themes are the same. The kinds of things we were talking about today. So ultimately, if we can help improve the lives of, it sounds so cliche, but if we can improve the lives of one physician, 10 physicians, I mean, that's huge impact.
So what's next for you?
I'm doing a lot of speaking right now. Been going to a lot of different conferences around the country and talking on these kinds of things, and really just hopefully impacting a lot more practices and trying to create as many beacons on the hill, if you will, to really just try and make a small dent in this huge, complicated, crazy industry that we all work in.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I think this is a great conversation, gives people something to think about as they enter into that conversation and as they conceptualize what it is they truly want before they even start negotiation of a salary, just truly understanding what the environment is that they're stepping into. If somebody wants to learn more about your company or connect with you, where should they look?
So as far as if they want to learn about the things that we're doing with practices, that our company Intentionate Healthcare Advisors is at Intentionate, INTENTIONATE.com. And then here's a more simple one. If you're a physician who's looking to help understand, evaluate, and negotiate their contract, contractmedicine.com. I'm not going to spell that out. Contractmedicine.com. Very straightforward.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Okay, great. So people can check that out for more information. So thanks so much for joining us for this chat on the us versus them mentality. And we hope this show has you thinking about your career and what action you can take to make it ideal for you right from the start. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and tell others to join us. We greatly appreciate your reviews and comments, which help us grow to a wider audience. If you want to stay in touch, email me at practiceonpurpose@heyinfluent.com. Let me know what topics you want us to explore in future episodes. And remember, build your practice on purpose to stay connected to your purpose. I appreciate you joining us on this journey. Let's keep exploring together. Until next episode.